The White House is brushing off the backlash, insisting President Trump was only expressing his personal view.
It's not an order, it's the president's opinion. The president is not obstructing, he's fighting back.
The president also focused on another item right now, the trial involving Paul Manafort, as you saw, obviously calling that a hoax. The president's been fuming about this. His allies tell me he says this has nothing to do with him and he shouldn't be drawn into it. Hallie?
Peter Alexander over at the White House. I will see you in a little bit, my friend, for the president's departure from the South Lawn later this afternoon. What's your bet? Is he going to take questions, Peter? Oh, just kidding.
Well, we'll have him ready.
Okay, thanks, Peter. You just saw Carol Leonnig. I'm so excited about it. We pulled her up early. National reporter for the Washington Post and MSNBC contributor on set with me, former federal prosecutor Seth Waxman. Also here, senior political reporter for the Washington Post, Aaron Blake, and senior Washington correspondent for Politico, Anna Palmer. The gang is all here. Hey, Carol, let me go to you. You are writing now about how the president sees this interview with Robert Mueller, how his legal team sees the interview. But here's the thing. Rudy Giuliani's talking and talking and talking about this. You know who's not? Robert Mueller.
That's absolutely true, Hallie. Robert Mueller's been silent, and the president's lawyers have been loquacious. But one thing has not changed, and that's the essence of Donald Trump, which is he believes he's his best lawyer, he's his own best PR guy, he's his own best thinker and diplomat. And in this instance, he does believe, and has, as we reported back in the spring, has always believed that if he could just sit down with these people, he could straighten this all out and explain no collusion, this is a hoax. Now, his lawyers also have changed slightly in the sense that some put their foot down at the beginning and said, you are not doing this interview. It will only create criminal exposure where you have none now. Until his more recent team of lawyers, headed by Rudy Giuliani, who have argued, it's not a good idea for you to do this, Mr. President, but if you insist.
Right. If you insist, go for it. Carol, we actually put together something that highlights exactly what you're talking about here. The idea that from the beginning, the president says, hey, I'm my own best advocate. I want to talk. Let me at him. Watch.
Would you do it under oath, Mr. President?
You mean like Hillary did it under? Who said that? Oh.
I said that.
Oh.
Did you do it under oath?
You said it. You did say it. You say a lot. Did Hillary do it under oath?
I have no idea, but I'm not asking.
I think you have an idea. Don't you have an idea?
Do you think he'll
Wait a minute. Wait. Do you not have an idea? Do you really not have an idea? I'll give you an idea. She didn't do it under oath. But I would do it under oath. Listen, but I would do it, and you know she didn't do it under oath, right?
She would do it under oath.
If you didn't do it, if you didn't know about Hillary, then you're not much of a reporter.
So you're going to do it under oath?
Say it.
To reach a higher standard, you would do it under oath.
Oh, I would do it under oath, yeah. Absolutely. I've always wanted to do an interview because, look, there's been no collusion. There's been no talk of Russia. There's been no phone call. There's been nothing. And I call it a witch hunt. That's exactly what it is. It's a vicious witch hunt. And you know what? It's very bad for our country. Very, very bad for our country.
And Carol, the point was raised to the White House over the last 24 hours. If the president wanted to wrap up this special counsel investigation so badly, he could offer to sit down and do that interview with Robert Mueller, and presumably that would help move it along.
Correct. And his lawyers have been working, literally, we're about to enter the 8th month of these negotiations. Initially, as we've described, the president was like, sure, let me at it. But his lawyers have tried to set some terms, some ground rules, limit some questions. And Giuliani told me, I think it's probably now 2 weeks ago, and we published it in the paper, he said in an on-record interview that his worry is that when the president is asked about what did you say to Jim Comey at that dinner where Comey says you said, let it go, let go of Michael Flynn, nice guy, why is he under criminal investigation? Giuliani's worry is that Mueller will believe Comey, and when the president says, I didn't say that, he exposes himself to some sort of perjury charge. They want that question off the table.
Carol, let me turn to Seth for a second, because Seth, Carol mentioned this has been going on for the past 8 months, right? We took a look back at all of the reporting over the last 8 months, because one would have thought a decision would have been made by now had you based that assumption on the reporting that's been out there based on what Rudy Giuliani has said and others. So January 8th, those initial talks were underway. April 30th, you had Mueller having dozens of inquiries for the president in this quest on the Russia obstruction question. On May 7th, the president's lawyers said in the next 10 days they would decide whether the president would testify. That deadline came and went, with Giuliani saying simply that Mueller had narrowed the scope of questions, bringing us to August 1st with this apparent offer to limit some of these questions just this week, Seth. Limiting questions, is that a good idea if you're Robert Mueller?
Well, he may agree to limit the questions just to get Trump in the room. If he wants a couple of, we're going to ask you about obstruction and talk to you about Lester Holt, he's not giving away much. And if that gets Trump in the room, which he wants more than anything else, he'll put some written questions on the paper. But I think this is a lot of just kind of watching the weigh-ins before the big fight. I don't think this is really going to happen.
But written questions, is that really something Mueller wants, or do you think he hooks him with the written stuff and then it's like a little bit of a bait and switch?
Well, I think that's exactly right. I mean, I think the written questions are pretty much filled out by the lawyers. I mean, they'll run them past Trump, and then he says, all right, did you say, when you said to Lester Holt that this firing of Comey was about the Russia thing, true or false? And then they've got 40 oral questions that follow up on that.
You both cover this president, this administration. Will the president, is there a chance? Listen, this is a guy, as I know from covering him, and as you know, who does what he wants to do. And if he turns around and says to Rudy Giuliani, nope, I'm doing it, I'm talking to Robert Mueller, who's going to stop him?
And he not only does what he wants to do, he often does the opposite of whatever anybody around him
the people around him want him to do.
Almost just to spite them. So I think it's interesting that the approach, as Carol noted, initially was, you're not doing this, no way. And now they're like, okay, well, you can do it if you want, but here are all the reasons that you shouldn't, including a perjury trap that they're putting forward and talking about very publicly now. So the fact that they're waging this very public campaign to basically, on TV, get him to back off of this stance, I think is maybe one of the most significant developments here.
I think what's also really interesting is, Trump and the administration keep saying over and over again, we want to wrap this up. We need Mueller
come to an end. It's not an order, it's an opinion, but da-da-da-da-da.
Clearly, this is just a delay tactic for him in terms of not doing this, for his team to not let him do this interview. They don't want him to do it. It's kind of pushing this further and further closer to the election.
Seth, if you were the president's lawyer, what are you telling him?
Well, I'm telling him to delay.
Keep your mouth, keep it zipped?
Absolutely. Do not talk. I mean, I think if Mr. Trump had never gone on Twitter in his life, he would not be anywhere close to the problems that he's facing.
He would
now.
also probably not be president, Seth,
well, that's
right?
probably true. But if I'm the prosecutor, every time he goes on Twitter, I've got a file. I add a new tab, and I say, that's evidence piece number 686. That's a good thing for us today.
There's also the president not only getting on the campaign trail, but continuing to do, his administration at least, the work that they wanted to do from day one, which is dismantling, for example, Obama-era regulations. Axios has a little something on that from our friend Jonathan Swan, who writes about how cable news, according to a former official he was talking to, wants to spend hours and hours dissecting the latest Trump tweet, yet they barely notice when we achieve long-sought conservative policy goals like adding work requirements to Medicaid, stripping federal funds from Planned Parenthood. I do take exception to that, only because if you've watched this show, former official, you know we cover those things in our Swamp Watch and Under the Radar segments. But there is this idea that even as the president is clearly spending a lot of time talking and tweeting about exactly this, there are other cogs in the wheel continuing to do the work on the policy side.
And I don't even think it's necessarily that the media isn't focusing on these things. I think it's that the American people aren't interested in them related to this Russia stuff. And I think the president recognizes that. Now, whether this is a strategy to say, look over here while they're doing this whole dismantling of the entire federal government over here, it sounds like the administration is saying that. But also liberals are saying that. They're saying, hey, look at what's going on over here. Let's not get distracted by this. But when you have a president like this who is constantly making news, constantly stoking controversy, it makes it that much harder for everything else to break through.
We have a ton more to get to in the show, so I want you two to hang out. Annie, you have a look on your face that I want to explore coming up. Seth, thank you for coming on. Carol Leonnig, pleasure to have you. Appreciate it.